Alright guys, here we are, clip 2 for the elbow anatomy and rehabilitation elbow exercises. Alright, so we left off, we had just finished all of the anatomy. We did the bones, we did the ligaments, we did the muscles, and we talked a little bit about the range of motion. And so now we're going to go over some of the things you can do when you're actually rehabilitating an elbow or forearm injury. Okay, so one of the things that we want to keep in mind to start off is our general body conditioning. So just because someone has an elbow or forearm injury doesn't mean that we shouldn't be trying to maintain cardiovascular fitness levels. So we can get them on a bike, we can get them on an elliptical, we can get them possibly even on a treadmill, depending on whether they're immobilized or not in the elbow. So we can maintain cardiovascular fitness that way. We can also do lower body strengthening exercises, leg dominant stuff, body weight squats, leg extensions, hamstring curls, lunges, all that kind of stuff. And then once the elbow permits us to carry some weight, whether that be a barbell or dumbbells or something like that, then we can start to add weight as well. Okay, so the initial inflammatory period is the same with all the major joints. We're going to try to immobilize it first, start early range of motion. We'll ice, we'll add compression, try to manage that swelling and acute inflammatory response. We can use NSAIDs if we need to. And then as soon as we can start range of motion, we'll move into passive exercises. So you can see in this picture here, we have a clinician passively taking the athlete through elbow flexion, and then he's probably going to bring her back into elbow extension after that. So starting with something nice and easy that's passive like that, where the athlete's not doing anything, the clinician is doing everything, can be really beneficial to get early range of motion back. There's a lot of variety of approaches that you can take to doing this, whether you're using some sort of pulley system or the clinician's doing it, or they have their arm on the table so that it's passive and relaxed as it goes through the motion. But the main goal is to not force the joint through any range, right? When we're in that early range of motion phase, we don't want to be forcing it. There does sometimes become a time and a place where we would want to force range of motion. Usually that's going to be in conjunction with doctor's orders of, hey, we really got to get this range and they're not getting it. We're going to make them push through some. But early on, that's not really our goal. Okay, another way to try and get range of motion is joint mobilizations. If you remember our convex-concave rule, okay, the distal segment is the one that we want to mobilize. And if that distal segment is a concave surface moving on a convex one, then we're going to have it move in the same direction, right? Concave surfaces are going to move in the same direction. The roll and the glide are in the same direction. Okay, if that distal segment is convex, then that roll and glide are going to be in opposite directions. Okay, so if you remember from our picture earlier, and I think I can bring it up, this hook of the olecranon is going to be a concave surface, and it might be a little easier to see right here, but it's going to be a concave. It's going to hook around that humerus. So it's going to be a concave surface, meaning that we want the roll and the glide to be in the same direction when we're mobilizing the elbow. Okay, also to think about is traction, and you can see that this clinician here is using traction. Traction is just creating some separation in the joint space. And just doing traction can actually be really pain relieving and help increase range of motion. So in this picture right here, the clinician has their elbow bent, and that's going to help them get a better grip to pull into traction. Another way to do it is right here. They're stabilizing with the other arm on the humerus and then pulling at the wrist to create that traction and really distracts and creates a space in the joint. Okay, so once we get full range of motion back, we can start to move into a strengthening phase. When we go through our strengthening phase, we want to start with low resistance, high repetition exercises. Okay, so we don't want to start with high weights, heavy weights. Start with something very small. Get them to go through that repetition over and over and over again. Pain-free is what we're looking for. I always tell athletes uncomfortable is okay, right? It's going to be uncomfortable because we're pushing them to get better, we're pushing them to get stronger, we're pushing them to get more range of motion, but we don't necessarily want it to be painful. Okay, so uncomfortable but pain-free. When we're working at strengthening the elbow, we also want to focus on strengthening the shoulder and our forearm grip exercises. Okay, so strengthening above and below that joint is going to be very helpful. Okay, and then the other thing is PNF and isokinetics. I don't know how much Mark talked to you about PNF, but that's a technique that we can use. Isokinetics are those machines that we talked about that only allow you to move at one speed. Probably only going to see that in a physical therapy clinic. Probably not going to have that in your athletic training room. Isometrics can be used. Remember, we can use those very early on when the elbow is still immobilized. And what we can do is we can have them do a forceful bicep contraction trying to flex the elbow, but not necessarily actually moving it. So whether they're resisting, being resisted by the clinician or by themselves holding the arm, but for whatever reason they're not actually moving the joint. Same thing with a tricep extension. You can try to push down against the clinician or a wall or yourself and activate that tricep. And then you can do that for the forearm as well by trying to move the wrist around in different ranges of motion, but resisting it against a wall or your hand, creating an isometric contraction. Okay. And then once we've got a good base of doing some lightweight, high repetition stuff, and we've moved past the isometrics and we've been working on the shoulder and the forearm, then we can start to really move into this graded progressive resistance exercise program, okay, the PRE program. And we can do that with tubing, we can do that with free weights like dumbbells, we can add manual resistance ourselves as the clinician. There's lots of different ways that could look, push-ups, dumbbell curls, stuff like that, but just really starting to add resistance exercise and have them really start improving their muscular strength. Okay, here's a picture with a lot of the different exercises. Okay, this guy's doing an overhead tricep extension and the clinician is resisting him as he goes through that range of motion. In this one below, he's doing a bicep curl and the clinician is resisting him. So that's how we can add a manual resistance. Okay, and then we can use dumbbells as you see in these two pictures. Again, she's starting with very light weights, but as you progress, you could move to bigger and bigger dumbbells as you get stronger. And then in these last ones, this is a good one for the forearm, for your pronator and supinator. Okay, so remember, supinator muscle opens up the joint like this. It opens the hand up like you're holding a bowl of soup. So you can imagine a bowl of soup on her hand right there. And then as she moves that weighted stick, she's going to move it over and across, and then she's going to slowly lower it back down to the floor right here. And that's going to be that pronation range of motion. So she's going to pronate like she's pouring the bowl of soup out, and she's going to slowly control that weighted stick. And then she can open it back up and supinate so that she's holding that bowl of soup again, and she would slowly lower that back down and control that weight. So that's a good pronation, supination exercise. You don't have to have this fancy weighted stick. You could use one of these light dumbbells as well. Okay, and then here's some tubing that you can do some different tubing exercises with. Just a resistance band. Okay, and then I wanted to make sure that I showed you the video on the ranges of motion. So here this guy's going to show us, this is him, he's going into extension. Okay, that's extension of the elbow. Okay, and then he's coming back into flexion, that's flexion of the elbow. Okay, and then now he's going to show us the pronation, supination. Okay, so as he opens up, oh, sorry, he's going to close up first. So that's pronation, he's pouring the bowl of soup out. Now he's opening the hands into supination. So you could imagine a bowl of soup on his hands. Okay, so that's supination, and the opposite was pronation. Okay, and then we'll move back to our slideshow here. Okay, as we move into some different exercises for the elbow, this is really moving towards our return to play type exercises, more sport specific. So imagine that this guy was an overhead athlete, throwing he throws a baseball or a water polo ball when he plays his sports. So here he's just working on getting that motion back of throwing. The nice thing is that the rebounder is going to come back at him, and he's going to have to control that ball as it comes back. Okay, over here he's in a very stable position because he's got his elbow on the table. So because he's in that more stable position, it makes the exercise a little easier, and he's working on the eccentric motion, trying to slow that ball down as it comes this way. So those are two variations of a functional progression back to his sport. Okay, some other stuff as we return to play and we do our functional progression. We can move to closed kinetic chain activities. Okay, so this person is in kind of a push-up position. They're putting weight on their hands. However, they're on an unstable surface right here. So this board is slippery. She's got these shoes on that allow her arms to slide. So as she goes through that motion, she has to stabilize, and that's helping stabilize shoulder, elbow, wrist, all of that. Here's another closed chain exercise. She could even come off the table and do a tricep dip like that. Okay, and then in this last one, she's on a ball, so she's stabilizing again. So just emphasizing the importance of dynamic stability, where she's not certain if she's going to be stable or if it's going to be rolling, and so her body has to stabilize as she's going through the exercise. So a really good thing to do right here would be to do push-ups on that ball, put one arm on the ball and do a push-up with the other hand off, then switch the ball over to the other hand. So those are a couple of progressions that you could go through. Alright, what else we got? So that's part of our functional progression. We could remember PNF that we could do. Some sort of swimming or aqua therapy would be helpful. You can start to incorporate pulley machines or rubber tubing. And then you always want to make sure that you're starting to simulate your sport-specific activity. Okay, so if they're an overhead throwing athlete, they need to start doing overhead motions, simulating that throwing motion. Okay, always remember to have a warm-up when you're doing any kind of exercise, and especially as they start to progress back to sport-specific, remember what is their sport-specific warm-up, building up to that activity so that they don't just jump right into it. Remember, that's how we could re-injure them. Okay, and then when we're ready to return to activity, we just want to have them return to that activity in a controlled environment first. So if they're a overhead throwing athlete like a pitcher or an outfielder, we'd want to have them go through a throwing program first where they're throwing outside of practice. Then we can start to have them throw longer and longer and have them have more repetitions. Make sure that that whole time they're within normal range of motion, they're pain-free, and then you can start to progress them back into practice, back into play, and just monitor them as they do that.